For those of you joining us who might not be familiar with our mission, Great Old Broads for Wilderness is a national grassroots organization led by women that engages and inspires activism to preserve and protect wilderness and wild lands and fun. My name's Laura Lonan, and I am a Vermont member of our Nor'easter Broadband. My fellow co-leads here today are Linda Graham from New Hampshire, Nancy Frost from Massachusetts, and Theo Pratt from Maine. Along with our broader membership and partners across the country, we are so excited to welcome Bill McKibben and grateful you've made time to be with us today. To start us off, Nancy will offer a land acknowledgement. I'll briefly run through some basic guidelines and say a few words to introduce our speaker, Bill McKibben. All set, Nancy?
Yes, thank you, Laura. Nor'easter Broads welcome you to today's gathering. We acknowledge that our broadband lives and works in the Dawnland, the ancestral and current homelands of the Wampanoag, Massachusetts, Pequot, Nipmuc, Abnaki, Penobscot, Passamaquoddy, and Micmac peoples. We know that the places that we call public lands and work to protect were unjustly wrested from these tribes and nations who have lived here since time immemorial. This wide landscape that was claimed as New England continues to be the home of its original peoples. We are committed to respecting the claims of the descendants of those pushed from their homes and land, and to working diligently with them to support their leadership in planning for a more equitable and sustainable relationship of reciprocity with these places.
Thanks, Nancy. That was a great way to get started. Just some brief guidelines. We actually now have everyone muted for the presentation. We welcome you to post questions and comments in the chat. Linda and Nancy will be reviewing those for a brief Q&A after the talk as time allows. We also welcome folks who are interested to stay on for post-discussion and introduction to our new executive director, Sarah Husby. And lastly, Lisa Poole is handling tech. That's Lisa, P-O-O-L. So please send her a private message in the chat if you need any help. I am now delighted to introduce our guest speaker, renowned environmentalist, author, and journalist, Bill McKibben. Bill helped Forum 350.org, the first global grassroots climate campaign. He serves as the Schumann Distinguished Professor in Residence at Middlebury College. Among his many awards and accolades are the Gandhi Peace Award, the Right Livelihood Prize, and honorary degrees from 19 colleges and universities. Bill's first book, The End of Nature, published in 1989, is considered one of the very first calls for action on climate change. He's since written over a dozen books, including his latest release in May, The Flag, the Cross, and the Station Wagon. If you can see it in there. A graying American looks back at his suburban boyhood and wonders what the hell happened. His work appears regularly in periodicals from the New Yorker to Rolling Stone. And finally, Bill is a founder of Third Act, which organizes people over the age of 60 for action on climate and racial justice. Bill wrote a piece in the New Yorker column in the fall of 21 titled "The Answer to Climate Change is Organizing." He recognized Great Old Broads for our work on mobilizing older generations and called on experienced Americans to pull their weight in defense of environmental sanity and economic and racial fairness. We're grateful for this opportunity to talk about ways that we can all collaborate to protect and sustain our planet and our society from one generation to the next. To quote the Third Act website, we back up the great work of younger people and we make good trouble of our own. Welcome, Bill. It's all yours.
Well, thank you very, very much, Laura. It's a great pleasure to be with you all. I've, of course, been following the work of Great Old Broads for a very long time and helping in the little ways I can, donating things for auctions and spreading publicity and stuff, because I've always loved both the work you do and the probably more importantly, the spirit in which you've been doing it. And it's a great pleasure to get to join with you here today. I thought I might, if it was okay, talk for just a few minutes about the larger picture of where we are in the climate fight and all of that, and then kind of start talking about how we might play increasingly important roles in it. It's quite true that I've spent my whole life working on this. I did, as Laura said, write the first book about it back in 1989 when I was in my 20s. Um, and and so I've been at work on it about as long as it's possible to have been at work on the climate crisis. And the real horror of all of that is nothing much has changed. We knew in 1989 most of what we know now. We knew that when you burned coal and gas and oil, you put carbon into the atmosphere, and we knew its molecular structure trapped heat that would otherwise radiate back out to space. And it was as plain as the nose on my face what would happen if we didn't stop burning coal and gas and oil. And of course, we didn't. We've put more carbon into the atmosphere since 1989 than in all of human history before. And so it comes as no surprise to scientists, and it should come as no surprise to any of us, that all the things they said would happen would happen. The temperature has so far gone up 1 degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit or so. Doesn't sound like so much. I mean, I'm sitting here on the porch in a completely beautiful day at the end of 4 as beautiful days as the northeastern United States is capable of producing. It's 75 degrees now. If it's 73 degrees when I finish, my body won't really be able to tell the difference. But the planet can tell the difference because all that heat is aggregated over such a large area. In fact, think of it in other units. The extra heat that we trap every day on this Earth is because of the fossil fuel we've burned, is the heat equivalent of about 400,000 Hiroshima-sized explosions every day. So when you think about it in those terms, it's easier to understand how we've melted most of the ice in the summer Arctic, why the world's oceans are now rising appreciably and ever more quickly, and how it is that we have transformed the hydrological cycle of the planet already. If you want one thing to understand the 21st century, one fact, you could do a lot worse than warm air holds more water vapor than cold. That basic physical fact explains why in arid areas, California, Australia, the Mediterranean, we're seeing rapid increases in evaporation and hence drought and hence quite predictably forest fire on a scale we've never seen before. And all these things are, of course, transforming every, human habitation that there is, our farms, our cities, but they're also transforming our wilderness in dramatic shape. It's really, since we're speaking of kind of arid areas in the West for the moment, it was really in Yosemite where the modern idea of the sort of grammar and rhetoric of wilderness first emerged. It's one of the places I love most in the world, the High Sierra, but it's not the same place that I knew as a young person. Those snowfields are largely gone. Fire season has become an absolutely regular part of life there. Once that water vapor is up in the atmosphere, it's going to come down. And it comes down in wet places like the northeastern United States, where the number of storms that drop more than 2 inches of rain over 24 hours is up about 70%. These are the kind of storms that do nobody any good, the gully washers that plague instead of helping farmers. And if you think it's bad here, of course, it's far, far, far worse in other parts of the planet. The most basic rule of climate change is the less you did to cause it, the sooner and the harder you get hit. So Africa right now is paying the highest price of climate change. At the moment, for instance, up in the Horn of Africa, centered on Somalia, we're now in the 5th straight rainy season with no rain. That drought is so deep that now hundreds of thousands of people are starving. Pictures are emerging that look like those pictures from Biafra in the 1970s of babies with swollen bellies. Human beings had done a pretty good job of starting to reduce extreme hunger on this planet. It went down year after year after year until about 2017, when it started to tick up again because the pace of natural disaster was outpacing our ability to grow more food. And that now is accelerating in dramatic ways. I bring up Africa in part because the entire continent of Africa, suffering more from global warming than anyone else, produced 2% of all the carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere. That's it. The 4% of us who live in the United States are responsible for 25% of the world's CO2 emissions. So this is, a homegrown problem in lots of ways. And it's going to get worse. That 1 degree Celsius, we're on a path right now, a trajectory to raise the temperature of the planet 3 degrees Celsius before my daughter, who's in her 20s now, is as old as I am. And if we let that happen, then we will not have civilizations like the ones we're used to having. The stress and strain will simply be too great. The UN estimates that could produce between 1 billion and 3 billion climate refugees on this planet, people who simply have to get up and move. So imagine what that means for any of the things that we care about development, about public health, about women's rights, about the protection of biodiversity. Our job, therefore, and it's the most important job that humans have ever had, is to try to figure out not how to stop climate change, it's too late for that, but to figure out how to stop it from getting any worse than it absolutely has to get. The hope now is that we can hold the increase in temperature to 2 degrees or a little less. If we're going to do that, it's going to take extraordinary effort to make it happen. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change estimates that we'd need to cut emissions roughly in half by 2030 to stay on target to the targets we set in Paris just 6 years ago. That's all depressing news. I'm sorry to lay it on you on what I hope is a beautiful day where everybody is. And now I'll tell you good news, which is that in a way we didn't even a few years ago, we know what we need to do. What we need to do is replace burning coal and gas and oil with sun and wind and the batteries to store the energy that they produce. I wrote in the New Yorker earlier this year that the rapid fall in the price of renewable energy, it's dropped 90% in the last decade, means that it's the cheapest power on Earth now. And it means that it's quite plausible to imagine human beings ending our 200,000-year career of setting stuff on fire in very short order. Setting stuff on fire served us well. Those first campfires allowed us to cook food, and that's what gave us, in part, the big brain that we have. We think that anthropologists think that gathering around campfires at night was one of the things that helped develop the close bonds that mark human societies. And any of us who've spent time out camped and around campfires understand how that's possible, the role that they can play. In the Industrial Revolution over the last 300 years, burning stuff brought us modernity, all the things that we associate with the prosperity that we take for granted. But that combustion is now causing huge problems, not just climate change. Breathing the byproducts of fossil fuel combustion, the latest big study from last year said, kills 9 million people a year on this planet. Those particulates get in the lungs of people, especially young people, especially poor people who have to live near highways and refineries and power plants. 9 million's a lot of people. It's more people than died from COVID last year. It's more people than died from HIV, AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis, war, and terrorism combined. It's 1 death in 5 on this planet, and it's entirely preventable. The vaccine for those deaths is electric bikes and electric buses and electric cars. It is air source heat pumps to heat our homes and induction cooktops in our kitchens. It is solar panels and wind turbines and batteries. We can deploy these things fast now if we want to, And if we did, as I said, we could replace the combustion that's always marked human activity on this planet with the fact that the good Lord saw fit to hang a large ball of burning gas 93 million miles away in the sky, and we now have the wit to make full use of it. We can catch its rays on those photovoltaic panels. We can take advantage of the fact that it differentially heats the earth, which causes the wind to blow, and we can capture the breeze with those turbines. It's a beautiful idea. And it's an idea that we can and should be making real. The problem is we're not making it real anywhere near fast enough. And the interesting question, of course, is why? We have the biggest problem humans have ever faced on the one hand, and a powerful solution on the other hand that's not only economic, that it saves us huge amounts of money if we do it and over time. So why aren't we? And really, I've spent most of my life trying to puzzle out that problem and do something about it. The reason that we're not is some combination of inertia, which is always a problem in human affairs, and more acutely, toxic vested interest. In this case, mostly the power of the fossil fuel industry. We now know from great investigative reporting that these guys lied for 30 years, 40 years about climate change. It turns out that companies like Exxon knew everything there was to know about climate change back in the 1980s when I was working on that first book. Their scientists were studying it. Exxon was the biggest company in the world. They had great scientists and their product was carbon. Of course they were studying it. So, and their scientists figured it out. We now know from archives that they had figured out spot on what the temperature was going to be in 2020. And they told their executives, and their executives believed them. Exxon started building every drilling rig they built higher to accommodate the rise in sea level they knew was coming. They started plotting just what parts of the Arctic they were going to lease once they melted it so they could drill for more oil. If that doesn't piss you off, then something's wrong with your anger mechanism. It makes me incredibly angry because what they did, instead of telling the rest of us, was spend across this industry billions of dollars building this architecture of deceit and denial and disinformation that kept us locked for 30 years in this stupid, sterile debate that I had to engage in over and over and over again about whether or not global warming was real. A question that both sides knew the answer to at the beginning. It's just one of them was willing to lie. And that lie may turn out to be the most significant lie in human history because it cost us the one thing we can't get back, which was time. Instead of having 4 decades to deal with this problem and work it out, we're down now to 6 or 7 years to take effective action. And so we've got to push really, really hard. Some of that pushing has to be done politically. That's what the wonderful kids from the Sunrise Movement did with this Green New Deal that's morphed into Joe Biden's Build Back Better bill, and thank heaven. Hopefully we can get it passed, but there's no guarantee the 50th vote belongs to Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin's taken more money from the fossil fuel industry than anybody else. It proved to be a wise investment on their part because he's blocking hundreds of billions of dollars for green energy. So we can't just push on Washington. We got to push on Wall Street too. The 4 big American banks, Chase, Citi, Wells Fargo, and Bank of America, have provided $1 trillion to the fossil fuel industry since the Paris Climate Accords were signed. That's the money that they use to keep building pipelines and expand LNG terminals and on and on and on. They didn't need Donald Trump to sabotage it for them. The big banks were happy to take on the Paris Climate Accords themselves. And so that's why we're working hard to try and push them in ways that I'll describe in a moment. I'll just say my last trip out before the pandemic was getting arrested in the lobby of the Chase Bank in Washington nearest the Capitol with Jane Fonda on the other side of the glass cheering us on. And these campaigns are crucial now. They're as crucial as the fight against the Keystone Pipeline, or this vast divestment campaign that, with your help, has turned into the biggest anti-corporate campaign in history, with $40 trillion in endowments and portfolios and pension funds selling their stock in coal and oil and gas. The interesting question that I want to end up on here is, who should be doing this fighting? And of course, the answer is everybody. But really, so far, mostly, I'm afraid the answer has been young people should be doing the fighting. I've had people over and over again, obviously not you all, but people you've probably met, who say, oh, the next generation should deal with this. The next generation is dealing with this. The leadership in the climate movements come from young people. I started 350.org when I was in my 40s, but with 7 college kids. They were amazing. Among other things, they set up this divestment campaign. And the college kids around America and the world who made that campaign work, when they got out of college, they went on to found that Sunrise movement and bring us the Green New Deal. And of course, beyond them, they're the really young kids, the junior high and high school students who came in with Greta Thunberg. You all know Greta's name, and you should. She's fantastic. I adore her. She's one of my favorite people to work with in the whole world. But she'd be the first to say that there are 10,000 Greta Thunbergs scattered across planet Earth, and they have 10 million followers. That's how many kids were out on school strike in September 2019 at the height of this movement, before the pandemic kind of cut it off at the knees for a while. They're amazing. But it's not okay to take the biggest problem the world ever faced and assign it to 17-year-olds to solve. To say, in between Spanish homework and field hockey practice, please also save the world. That's both ignoble and impractical, because for all their intelligence, idealism, earnestness, commitment, and ability, they lack the structural power to make the change that's required. It's older people, I think, who may turn out to be the absolutely essential complement to that youthful energy. We started organizing Third Act. One of the reasons was because I read, someone did the statistics, if you're 60, 85% of the carbon that's been emitted in the planet's been emitted in your lifetime. This is our problem, and we're the ones that have the power to solve it. There are 70 million Americans over the age of 60. That's bigger than the population of France. 10,000 people join that number every day. That's more people than are born every day in this country. Not only are there a lot of us, multiply our power in lots of ways. We vote like crazy. There is no known way to keep old people from voting, okay? And hence our power, for good or for bad, in Washington is extraordinary. We also ended up with most of the money. Not all of us, but 70% of the financial assets in the country belong to the baby boomers or the silent generation above them, compared with about 5% for millennials. So if we want to pressure Wall Street, we need older people. You guys have been doing a great job of organizing people of a certain age, experienced Americans, you might call us. And that's pretty rare, rarer than it should be. There hasn't been that much effort to organize older Americans for progressive change since Maggie Kuhn and the Gray Panthers back in the 1970s. And the reason is that the conventional wisdom is people become more conservative as they age. There's some statistical evidence to back that up. People get more stuff, and so they have more to defend, But we can't let that happen here, and we do not need to let that happen. This generation of older people has very specific historical DNA that puts it in the place to make real change. If you're in your 60s or 70s or 80s now, your first act on this planet came and coincided with this period of epic cultural, social, political transformation. You were around for the height, the apex of the civil rights movement, and with it, the Voting Rights Act. You were around for the moment when we decided as a society that we were going to let women play a full role in the world around us, or at least a fuller role than they had before. You were around for the first Earth Day in 1970, when 20 million Americans, 10% of the then population, took to the streets in what was probably the largest demonstration in American history, and that within a year had created the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act and the EPA. If you want to know how important all this stuff was, reflect on the fact that the Supreme Court just spent the last month systematically undoing one by one those victories. Okay, everything they did was aimed at stuff that happened in that first act. Roe v. Wade from 1973, obviously. The EPA and the Clean Air Act from 1970 and 71. When they took on, when they allowed people to start carrying guns wherever they wanted to, it was a repudiation of the Gun Control Act of 1968. The efforts at voter suppression underway around the country are a repudiation of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Our first act was something special. Our second act, noble exceptions aside, and I'm sure everybody represented on this call is a noble exception. Second act, it's probably fair to say that as a generation, we were more interested in consumerism than we were in citizenship. We let a lot of stuff slide. That water is under the bridge. We emerge into our third act with lots of resources, lots of skills, maybe more time than we had at other points in our life, and in many cases with kids or grandkids to make that abstract idea of legacy very concrete and real. Legacy is what you leave behind for the people you love the most, and what we're leaving behind, and we're the first generation that has to say this, is a planet that's a lot worse than the one we inherited. There are, for instance, half as many wild animals on this earth as there were in 1970. Not species, animals, total number. That's almost impossibly sad to think about. The world that we inhabit is very different from the one we were born into. There may be people here who, like me, can remember when those first pictures of the Earth came back from the Apollo missions, and how beautiful it was, this blue-white marble floating in the black void of space. Well, it doesn't look like that anymore. Those pictures are as out of date as my high school yearbook picture. There is way, way less white at the top. We've melted half the sea ice in the summer Arctic. So, almost the end of this sermon. Our job is to figure out how to mobilize as best we can. That's what we're trying to do at third act, and the good news is the response has been overwhelming. People have been signing up by the tens of thousands and organizing chapters and working groups, some of them geographic, some of them based on what people did in their lifetimes, third act educators, third act health professionals, on and on. A great deal of the fun comes from sort of co-organizing with young people. We've been doing a lot of that. This bank campaign is the perfect example. We're pushing hard to get the big banks to change their fossil fuel lending policies. One way of doing that is people are signing on to a pledge that at year's end, they'll cut up their credit cards, try to switch their bank accounts if they can from those banks. And if you go to thirdact.org and click on Banking for the Future, you'll see how you can join in on that. But we've also been staging lots of demonstrations outside banks, and they've been a lot of fun because they invariably become multi-generational. Third Act, Vermont, did a good one up in Burlington outside the Chase Bank there. There were lots of high school kids on hand. High school kids move a little faster. They were at the front of the march, but they were followed by a large cloud of older people marching under a sign that said "Fossils against fossil fuels." That seems to me to be in the spirit of Great Old Broads for Wilderness. It's what we got to do. And we're seeing, among other things, the cultural icons of this era joining in to help. When young people go on and on about, okay, boomer and stuff with me, I grant them whatever they want, but I always say, fight me if you want, but deal with this. Our generation did produce the best music that there ever was. So it's been great fun to have Carole King and Bette Midler and Neil Young and on and on and on joining in to help. If you come to our big national all-in call on Wednesday night, which has become we do them once a month and they're great fun. This time we're going to be joined, at least via video, by Mandy Patinkin and his wonderful wife, Catherine Brody, who have put together remarkable little video. So that kind of work is happening. And I guess that one of the reasons that this all appeals to me so much is that, as you guys have discovered, there's real power in having people show up to fight for things who aren't exactly who people suspect are going to show up and fight for them. When we think about wilderness, we mostly think at this point about young people, and they're on, mountain bikes and whatever else. That's why it's great to have older people saying, no, look, most of the wilderness in the US was created in our lifetimes. That was part of that first act too, the Wilderness Act of 1963, and the great and amazing acreage protected ever since. And we will fight for it. I remember, and here I really will end, this is the last story I will tell. I remember, I was just thinking as I was talking about the demonstrations 11 years ago that launched this Keystone pipeline campaign, which really became the signal environmental battle of the last decade. And I wrote the letter that asked people to come to Washington to get arrested, which is never an easy kind of letter to write, but it was effective because it turned into, there were more people arrested and bigger civil disobedience action than about anything in this country in many, many decades. But one of the things I said in that was, I did not think that young people should have to be the cannon fodder in this fight. They're doing most of the leading, but if you're 19, it's possible that an arrest record is not the best thing for your resume. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? So it was with great pleasure that we saw lots of people, with hair that looked like mine arriving in Washington. We did not ask people as they were getting arrested, how old are you? Because that would be rude. But we did, cleverly, I think, ask people, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest cohorts were from the FDR and the Truman administrations. On the last day, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He was old enough that he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which frankly was long enough ago, I'd almost forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration. It was particularly beautiful because there were a lot of young people there, and they got to see their elders acting in the way that we need elders to act in a working civilization. I think that of all the things that annoy me in the whole world, and there are several things that annoy me, maybe the thing that annoys me most is that bumper sticker you sometimes see on Winnebagos with people in Arizona or something, and it bumper sticker says, I'm spending my kids' inheritance. It's gross and also highly accurate. And we've got to stop doing it. We've got to start protecting our inheritance. You guys have been doing this for many years, and I couldn't be more grateful. But now I really hope that you'll join in these efforts across as wide a spectrum as possible, because if we cannot get a hold at the most root levels of these questions around climate change, then the wild world that we love will be one of the very first casualties. I've lived my whole life in the woods, either in the Adirondacks or on the other side of Lake Champlain in the Green Mountains. Hiking and skiing that country has been the great joy of my life, and it's the thing that's kept me sane. And I've done my best to give back. I've been on the, for instance, worked hard with the Northeast Wilderness Trust and with the Adirondack chapter of the Nature Conservancy, and we've conserved hundreds and hundreds of thousands of acres of land. But it's not going to do a lick of good if we can't keep the temperature from skyrocketing ever upward. The flora and the fauna that inhabit wilderness don't do it because they understand they're in protected territory. They do it because it's the right temperature. So we got to save not just the terrain, but the temperature too. We've got to have a world that works, and we can only do it if we pull in hard behind young people in making this fight now. So that's where I'm going to stop. I'm sorry to have rattled on so long. I'm extremely grateful to you guys for all the work you've done over all the years, and I'm eager to help in whatever ways I can, including just offering this chance to be part of this big, broad coalition with lots of people our age working hard on this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you so much. If you have time, we would love to circulate a few of the questions that came up on the chat. Thank you.
Love to. I'd love to.
Great.
Nancy and Linda?
Yeah, I see one here from Shelby Robinson. She's asking, what about the impact of agriculture, crop, and meat production on climate change?
It's high. We think it's about 18% of emissions, after fossil fuels next. And it's particularly acute in the way that we produce livestock, beef in particular. At the moment, that takes up, I was just looking at these figures because I was reviewing George Monbiot's remarkable new book about agriculture called Regenesis, which I recommend. Because we clear so much land for growing the feed for cattle, especially in the tropics, it takes something like 163 square meters to get you a pound of beef. I'm not remembering the exact figures, but the ratios are right. Pork and chicken are 1/10 of that. And if you're just eating tofu, it's half again chicken. But the huge problem is beef. Stay away from it if you can, unless you can get it grown in ways that you know and approve of. And if you have trouble, if you're trying to convince others, because we're really past the point where individual action makes much difference here. We're not going to save the world one Tesla at a time, one vegan dinner at a time. The most important thing individuals can do is come together, sort of be less individual and come together with others to build the kind of movements that you've been building. But if you want to enlist others in this, one book that I recommend, I got to write the foreword to this year, was a book called Meet Me Halfway by a guy named Brian Caton. And his thesis, which I think is correct, is it's often hard to convert people straight out to veganism or vegetarianism, but pretty easy to get them to cut in half the amount of meat that they're eating, and just learn to cook it in different ways and things. I think that's absolutely right, and I think it's important because huge parts of the rest of the world are just coming into their meat-eating years, you know, and it's going to be very hard to persuade them to forego it entirely, but perhaps not impossible to shift the ways that we think about meat in important ways. So there's a lot to be done with agriculture. It's a distinct second, but important second to dealing with fossil fuel combustion.
We also had a few questions about cars. Is it better to keep an old car that runs on fossil fuels or to get a new car, keeping in mind the mining costs and the mining impacts?
Sure.
And somebody specifically wants to know if it's okay to get a Tesla.
Well, I mean, the only real problem with getting a Tesla is that that maniac Elon Musk is sort of driving in the back seat, you know, while you're while you're there. But credit where due, he did do a lot of good to produce, the first electric vehicles. It's a shame that he's managing to undo most of it in other ways. I confess, I remain highly hopeful that several of our billionaires will propel themselves towards Mars and not come back. But electric vehicles in general are a very good idea. I mean, the best of them are electric buses and e-bikes. If you haven't been up on an e-bike yet and you're capable of biking, go try one out. It'll blow your mind. It'll change your whole conception of what mobility and transportation are like. But electric cars are important. Now, it is very true that you've got to mine lithium and cobalt and things to produce them. And we should do our very best to do that responsibly and humanely. There are environmental problems associated with everything to do with renewable energy, but they are not existential environmental problems. Getting them wrong doesn't end the world the way that increasing the temperature 3 or 4 degrees does. Remember, when you're thinking about the relative impacts of these things, remember what I told you, that 9 million people a year, most of them poor, die from breathing the combustion byproducts of fossil fuel. You'd have to do an awful lot of damage in lithium mines and things to even begin to approach goals like that. The other real reason, though, to just sort of understand the beauty of the transformation that we're undergoing is that if we converted to renewable energy, the total mining burden on the planet would drop by about 80%. Yes, you have to mine lithium and cobalt and stuff like that, but you mine them once. You mine the lithium, you build a solar panel, you stick up the solar panel, and then the sun delivers the energy for free when it rises above the horizon every day for the next quarter century. That's exactly the opposite of our current system, where you mine something, you burn it, and then you have to go mine some more of it the next day ad infinitum. In passing, this is precisely the reason that Exxon et al. Have fought so hard against renewable energy. It messes with their business plan. They got rich because they sold you a new delivery of oil every month for your whole existence. In this case, that disappears. A way of thinking about this that I find handy, I wrote a piece about it last year. We did the research to get the number, and it's stuck in my head ever since. 40% of all the ship traffic in the world, 40% of all the ships on the ocean are just carrying coal and oil and gas back and forth so it can be burned. You got to ship the windmill blade over once from wherever it gets built. But once it's up, it just spins there forever. Think about, I mean, just in terms of wilderness, think about the world with 40% less ships making their way around the planet. Imagine yourself as a whale who suddenly has half as many big noisy things chugging through the sea around you. Our possibilities of beginning to dematerialize the world a little are really immense right now.
Great. I think there was one follow-on, and that is someone who has an older car that still works, and they're wondering, should they keep it until it dies?
Yeah, that's
an electric car, or should they just stop emitting that stuff right away?
Well, I mean, it's a little hard to do the math all around it. If you've got a reasonable car that's, not burning too much gas and whatever, hold on to it for a few more years. Right at the moment, there's such an over demand for electric cars anyway that they're a little hard to get a hold of. So you might want to hold on to it for another year or two. But do not hesitate about getting an electric vehicle. I've had one for years. They're great. I mean, even if there was no such thing as climate change or pollution, they're just way better than any car you ever drove in your life. There's no moving parts in them, so they don't really break. They're quiet as can be, and if in the sort of American tradition, you enjoy acceleration, wait till you step on the pedal of this thing. It's crazy. So there's no reason. I mean, if you can nurse a few more years out of your car, don't worry about it. Wait for the next generation to come along. But do not hesitate now if you need a new car, because they're ready to go and they're terrific.
Great.
I see one here. Are states leading the way on climate change as the federal government is being held back from change by corporations and others who are slowing progress down? Lots of others slowing progress down.
A few states are leading the way, or trying. California being the best example. California is really the one state that's big enough and economically robust. I mean, California, remember, is the 5th leading economy in the world. It's the same as Germany in economic terms. So it can do a lot. But I got to say, the Supreme Court's making it clear that it may well, as early as next year, rein in the ability of states to get out ahead of the federal government on things like automobile regulation. That's why, in the end, this is such a important political. The real challenge, the reason we do things like these bank campaigns, is to try and break the political power of the fossil fuel industry, which gets expressed in states in the same way that it does in the federal government. And so states like Texas or things, these are the guys, the attorneys general of the fossil fuel states are the ones who brought this case before the Supreme Court that was just decided that basically neuters the EPA as a force in fighting climate change. So yeah, states and cities can do some stuff, but by themselves, they cannot produce change at the pace that we need. It's one of the reasons that I like pushing Wall Street so much and big corporations, because they're able to move, if they move, quickly, and they're global in scale. The US doesn't dominate the world politically the way it once did, but Wall Street continues to dominate the world economically. If Chase Bank tomorrow said, we're no longer lending for the expansion of the fossil fuel industry, that would be reflected in every stock market on earth within 20 minutes. It would be an extraordinary moment. And so, it's precisely what we should be aiming for. I'll add, and I see this question about, REI is, a credit card comes from Chase, so does Costco, so does Amazon, so does United Airlines. There's a lot. If you open your wallet, you've got lots of ways to, if you've got a credit card and a pair of scissors, you're an important activist here. Just don't do it on your own, because it's possible that Chase will not notice you doing it by yourself. We're going to do it, a lot of us, all at once at the end of the year as part of this campaign, and it's going to be fun. And it'll be the first attempt to make some real impact here. This whole question got much sharper in the last few months. I wrote a long piece for the New Yorker about this new study that demonstrated exactly how big the carbon impact of these banks is. It turns out that the money that, say, big companies have sitting in the bank is producing more carbon than their operations. This someone finally came up with an algorithm for calculating how much carbon money sitting in the mainstream banking system produced, and the numbers were off the charts. The headline of the piece in the New Yorker, my piece in the New Yorker, was Google's carbon emissions went up 111% overnight. Netflix produces more carbon from its cash on hand than from all the streaming of every bad movie on earth every night through all time. Amazon produces more carbon from its cash on hand than all its delivery vans and warehouses that it owns. On and on and on. And so it's a huge opportunity to really highlight this stuff. As far as individuals go, If you have $125,000 in the bank, it's producing more carbon because it's being lent out for pipelines and things than all the cooking, flying, heating, driving, fueling that an average American does in an average year. So these are big numbers. This is a big place to push and a real new interesting opportunity for making change. And we'll have to do it strategically, and we'll have to do it together for it to matter. But it may turn out to be one of the key pinch points here.
Wow, yeah, absolutely. We also had a question about, we have a few folks who I think are ready to organize. And one question was the difference between Third Act and 350.org and what the reason is for those two. And a second question is sort of, if you are interested in organizing a chapter of Third Act and that you'd like to do that, what would be your first step?
Yes, very good questions. So in the first point, if you feel like you have a great venue right now for organizing around climate change, stick with it. And there's great 350 chapters doing great work. The reason that we wanted to start Third Act was because we wanted to bring this particular generational flavor to this work. And we really wanted a way to try and explain to other people within our age cohort that it's not inevitable that they need to become sort of conservative and grumpy and whatever, that it's entirely possible for them to remain progressive, engaged, working with instead of against young people, on and on and on. And I think that that generational transformation could be really important. There's going to be so many people, such a high percentage of the population over the age of 60 in the next couple of decades, that if we just allow our generation to kind of, all become, kind of Trumpy, we're out of luck. There's too many of us. We're not dying off quickly. We've got to do the work to make sure that we have a different kind of elder generation. It's exactly, I think, the reason that you guys started organizing Great Old Broads back when you did. And so it's, if you want to find a chapter or organize one, probably the best person to write to is we have a very small staff, and so we've got at the moment very little money, and so on. We have too many volunteers. We have lots of volunteers and very few staff, but their staff is amazing. So write to Bob Fulkerson, who's just bob@thirdact.org, and he will help figure out how to fit you into a chapter that's already going, how to start a new one, how to operate as a lone wolf, whatever in these things. He's terrific, and I do encourage people to drop by on Wednesday night for this hour-long Zoom call. They're always interesting and very diverse in all kinds of ways, and lots and lots of fun. I see a good question about the message about democracy and climate change that's worth answering, because that's the other thing we're working hard on at Third Act. Really, we've taken it as our job to try and protect the political climate and the climate climate. We took both these things for granted. It did not occur to any of us in our youth that we could actually change the temperature of the earth. Like, we understood that you could pollute things, and that's why we passed the Clean Air Act, and then the air got cleaner. So good, and I think we probably figured that kind of rational would go forward, and instead the fossil fuel industry prevailed, and now we're changing the temperature. Similarly, I don't think it occurred to any of us. I mean, look, I remember in my youth being shocked by Watergate and its attack on democratic norms and things, but the system worked. We kicked the guy out on his rear end, and so that was good. And I don't think it occurred to any of us that we would end up in a situation where fellow Americans were storming the US Capitol and killing police officers in an effort to stop the counting of votes. So shame on us for taking both these things for granted. Now is the time to do some work on them. Our campaigns around democracy are largely aimed at trying to make sure that people have the right to vote and that they exercise it, that these voter suppression laws are defeated. So one of the things we've been doing that's really been fun is this project called Senior to Senior. Older people writing high school seniors talking about what voting has meant to them in their lives. Because almost everywhere, high school seniors are eligible to vote in their next election, but only about 10% of them do. So it's really helpful to try and get people engaged early on. But there's lots and lots and lots of other work, endless phone banking opportunities as the midterms approach, things like that, and good and important work to be done on both these fronts.
Linda, do you have others? I'm seeing a few, but I don't want to, you might have spotted an important question.
I see one here from Jacqueline. So I just read them, sorry. The Buddhist Joanna Macy, who writes about despair as a motivation and who has always been optimistic, now lifts up that the climate change is happening and there is no way going back or stopping it. Instead, we must learn how to survive the major changes coming. We can't stop what's inevitably coming, and it's not good. Reverend Michael Dowd, who has a website, Postum, which has conversations about how to survive with what is coming for humanity. So your thoughts?
Sure. And I don't want to hold you all forever, and this may be as good a place to end as any. It's a kind of natural conclusion. Joanna Macy, by the way, is wonderful, and people who don't know her work, you'll find it a tonic. And she is a great friend of the wilderness and life in it. And I haven't read whatever the question is referring to, but I don't think she thinks that there's no point in organizing or trying to slow down climate change. She's absolutely right that we're not going to stop climate change. That's not on the menu. And it makes me really sad to say that. I mean, one of the things I have to always stop myself from saying, since I wrote the first book about all this back in the 1980s, is, oh, if only you'd listened to me then, you know. We're past the point where we can stop this, but we're not past the point where we can keep it from getting worse than it has to get. There is all the difference between a world where the temperature goes up 1.5 degrees Celsius and a world where it goes up 3 or 4 degrees Celsius. One's going to be difficult, the other is going to be literally impossible. So our job for the moment is to slow down that increase in temperature as best we can. And that's really the work of the rest of our lifetimes. It's absolutely true that we, and especially the people who are going to come after us, our kids and our grandkids, are going to have to live on a world that is changed in good ways. And I think that as I've done a lot of writing about this, my way of thinking about that, people often say to me, where should I move in order to escape climate change? And there is no place to move to escape climate change. You know, I mean, if you can figure out a way to get to New Zealand, you're probably better off, but less because it's going to escape climate change than because it's a good example of a community that works. That's what you need to be looking for. The places that are going to do well are places where we take seriously our neighbors, where we build high levels of social trust, where we're good at working together. So think about places, for instance, where people didn't balk at wearing masks during the pandemic and were lining up to go get shots when they got available. You know, I'm proud to live in Vermont. We came through this with fewer people as a percentage of our population dying than almost any place else in America and most places on the planet. And it's because we had very high levels of social trust. That's the work that we have to do, and that people like Joanna Macy are so good at doing, building community. And that's the final reason that it's important to do organizing of the kind that y'all have been doing and the kind that we're doing at Third Act, we build community within these organizations. That's really important. And we build community in the world around us through them. We try to make political systems that will deal fairly and equitably and sanely and safely with a difficult world that we have built. That's an important task. Let me just end by saying there's one other task that y'all are good at, and that is getting out in and enjoying the world around us. We are the one species that's fully, as birds have flight, our particular gift is consciousness. And we can look at the world around us and bear witness to its incredible beauty. And that beauty, the world is not going to be more intact tomorrow than it is today, just the opposite. So make sure that today and every day, at least for a little while, you get out in that world, in whatever way you can, at the park, in your garden, in the wilderness, and appreciate and get nourished by the incredible beauty of it. People often ask me how I manage to keep doing this work year after year after year, because it is depressing sometimes. And I could not have done it if I didn't live on the border of the Breadloaf Wilderness and the Green Mountain National Forest, because I need to get out there more often than not, and remind myself that we are a small part of something very big and beautiful and mysterious and cool and buzzing and magnificent. And I need also to get out at night in dark places every once in a while and look up at the stars and remember that there is a huge universe out there. And for whatever reason, that helps me a good deal, and I hope it helps you all a good deal. And I just can't thank you enough for what you all have done. And it's always been fun to think of myself as a small part of the men's auxiliary of Great Old Broads, and more power to you, and keep it up, and see you along the way. See you in jail, see you in the streets, see you online, see you someplace. Mostly, I hope I see you on the trails, and God bless everybody.
Thank you. That was a great note to end on. Lot to think about, lots of energy to advocate. We look forward to making more trouble with Third Act. Thanks a lot.
Take care, y'all.
Thank you.
Now, please stay on just a few minutes. We'd love to introduce you to our new Executive Director of Great Old Broads for Wilderness. So I'll just say a little bit more about Great Old Broads for Wilderness. I'll introduce Sarah Husby, our new Executive Director, and then I would love for our local chapter in New England, the Nor'easter Broads, to say a bit more about getting involved. So it was such a pleasure to have Bill McKibben speak with us today. So we'll just stay on for a few more minutes. I'm Lisa Poole, the director of the Grassroots Leadership Program for Great Old Broads for Wilderness. My team supports our organization's mission to engage and inspire community members all over the country as activists to protect and preserve wilderness and wild public lands. You heard Bill say it today that we can't do this work alone. We need to do it in groups, in large groups, and that is what we are all about. We aim to engage people in activism so we can build this movement to protect the world and combat climate change, protect wildlands. So we empower women with a very effective grassroots leadership and advocacy training program. In fact, over the last 14 years now, we have recruited, trained, and mentored over 200 women volunteers who have stepped up to lead local chapters known as broadbands. So by coming together as a team of inspired advocates, broadbands really get a lot done. Just like Bill was talking about taking action with the Third Act, and some of our groups are, some of our chapters are partnering with the Third Act, which is really fun. But we write letters to the editor. We write letters to elected officials. We speak up at town halls. Broads take all kinds of action to pressure decision makers to conserve public lands. And we show up when it counts, at climate change marches, rallies to save wild salmon and orcas, and also in Washington, D.C. to lobby members of Congress. In fact, before the pandemic, 14 broadband chapter leaders traveled to DC and held over 40 lobby meetings just in a couple of days. The pandemic didn't slow us down either. Our associate director organized a set of broadband leaders and members to hold over 50 lobby meetings over the course of a couple days, all over Zoom. So advocacy isn't the entire picture, and it really is a large piece of the picture. I mean, we absolutely need to make sure that that climate change is, it's already one of our big priorities. We need to make sure that public lands are the solution to climate change, part of that solution to climate change. In fact, I just pulled from a Department of Interior fact sheet from last year that fossil fuel extraction on public lands accounts for nearly a quarter of all US greenhouse gas emissions. So we absolutely need to be working on this together. But like I said, advocacy isn't the entire picture, because how are we going to create a movement that lasts? We need to sprinkle in a healthy amount of stewardship projects, educational programs, and most importantly, fun. That's a huge part of our brand here at Great Old Broads. So please, if you aren't already involved, please get involved. There's likely a broadband chapter near you, and if there isn't, we can start one. So with that, I would love to introduce our new executive director who just started last week, Sarah Husby.
Hello there, everybody. This is an awesome opportunity to be able to join so many of you today via Zoom. I know Bill has already stepped off, but I do want to say thank you to him, the Nor'easter Broads, and all the staff in Durango for helping put this together. I am so excited to be a part of this organization. I actually found out about Great Old Broads in 2014 when I went to the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I remember them outside the hotel in the little conference area with their table and going up and looking at the information. And I knew right then and there it was a group that I wanted to support. And I became a monthly sustainable donor and a broad in training at the time. Being able to kind of come on in this leadership role, it's really been a dream come true. Great Old Broads has been able to really use their voice in a powerful way, and I'm really looking forward to continuing that and elevating the work that we're doing on the local and national level. I'm going to have a lot of opportunities to get to know you. We have some great stuff kind of planned with the different broadband chapters that Lisa and her team are going to be working on. So kind of keep an eye out for that soon. You can all reach me if you need to via email, so don't hesitate to kind of drop a note and say hi. I do want to say that this would not have been possible today if it wasn't for the wonderful local broadband chapter New England Nor'easters. So I really want to thank them for putting this together. It's about education also. You know, we're able to share this important message to so many people, and it's a teamwork to make that happen. So I'm going to hand this over to Linda to speak about opportunities, how folks can get involved in their local broadband chapter. And I look forward to connecting with you all in the future.
Sure. I'm Linda. I'm in New Hampshire, and I heard about the Great Old Broads many years ago. It took quite a few years to get involved, and I spent a lot of my second act in the woods of New Hampshire, so it was very a part of my life to figure out a way to use my third act to speak for nature. As soon as I was retired, I took the training for the Great Old Broads and thought the Northeast was not represented in the Great Old Broads chapters as completely as we could be. I started the New Hampshire chapter and was immediately joined by the Massachusetts, Nancy Frost, the leader there. And oh my gosh, did we ever hit it with COVID? We had barely started, then bingo, we were out of luck in terms of meeting with each other. So we went on to Zoom and started having meetings and thinking about our general meetings in terms of education. And we thought we should invite Lara from Vermont and Theo from Maine to join us so that we became the Nor'easters, a collaborative broads. Our issues, which are not quite the same, we don't have the same kinds of public lands that you have out west. We considered water to be a very important issue, whether it's coastal warming or what's running into the rivers that other people are drinking from our state further south. We also realized we could raise some consciousness around Indigenous rights on the East Coast, and we have taken that under our as a motivator as well. And recently, we are looking at old growth forests along with what is happening nationally. There's Laura or Nancy, or I'm not sure if Theo is here. Do you want to add anything?
I think I was listening to while Bill was talking about how we nourish ourselves and how we, stay active in this. And I just want to offer to folks, if you're not familiar with it, we have some opportunities if you're in the Northeast. We are going camping in places so that we can look at the stars, places where we don't have so much light pollution. We have a camping trip coming up in August. We're going to be going to camp again in Vermont. And look at learning more about invasive plants and how we can help to strengthen the biodiversity in our forests with that. We also do advocacy. One of the fun things we do in the Nor'easters is once a month, we all get together and we write those pesky letters that you all mean to send to your senator, but you sort of never get to. We don't have any guilt here because we get together, we get the letters all out, we laugh, we have a good time, we help each other when, the senator's website isn't or email isn't working real well. But we get that stuff done once a month and know that we're beginning to have relationships with these people because they hear from us frequently enough, which is really exciting. I also want to put out there, a number of you are talking about wanting to, what can I do? How can I get more involved? And as Lisa said, there is a training program for folks who'd like to be in leadership roles. And we're particularly looking for people from Vermont and from Maine. Who would be interested in perhaps taking on some of the leadership of the Nor'easter group. So if that's a possibility, reach out to Lisa and let her know, and we'll find a job for you. We'd be happy to have and any of you participate that would like to. Laura, you have anything you would like to share about this group?
I'm just grateful to be a part of it and inspired by all of you. Thanks, Nancy.
Well, Laura's the person who made the contact with Bill. So a big thank you for that. That was wonderful.
Sometimes you just have to ask.
That's what broads are really good at doing. You just have to ask. So thank you so much, Laura and the Nor'easter Broads, for hosting. For those of you who are not in New England, you got a taste of what one wonderful broadband chapter is doing in their neck of the woods. If you are elsewhere in the country, please do not hesitate to contact us at Great Old Broads. I put my email in the chat and you can check us out online, www.greatoldbroads.org.